Hello everybody, hope you're doing marvelously well. In this episode we're going to come up with 10 things that the pros do in every single mix. Please as ever subscribe, hit the notifications bell and you'll be notified when we have a new video. So, number one, proper gain staging. The last thing we want to do is do something like this. Horrible clipping, going to our master bus, just not pretty. You do that on multiple outputs and it's going to sound horrible. Number two, create buses to really help you quickly and creatively mix your song. Okay, as you can see here, as I just demonstrated, I have a piano bus. I also have strings. So there, for instance, we have multiple string outputs, all going to one bus. So if I want to control that, so much easier. Once I have my blend, it's the same thing for drums, it's the same thing for any instrument. Once you have your blend that you love, bust them together and then you'll have overall control of that instrument. So, bust your drums, bust your bass, bust your keys, bust your acoustic guitars, your electric guitars, your programming, create buses. You're then going to give yourself a lot of control and you'll be able to move really quickly through the mixing process. 3, use high-pass filters properly. This is a big one. Using high-pass properly gets rid of unwanted noises like AC and rumble. It's particularly a problem in vocals, background vocals, percussion, and other such instruments. Use high passing properly and you'll open up the low end to let the kick and the bass guitar and other instruments down there really breathe properly. Here, for instance, I have an electric guitar which has a gentle slope at 100. If I bypass it, it actually sounds thinner, because I've boosted the fundamental signal, but I've high passed at 100, gently high pass there, allowing the bass guitar and the kick to breathe more. If you boost the fundamental low end in a signal and enhance that, you can get rid of the low rumble and the guitar, and any other signal that you do this to will sound much fatter. Here, for instance, on the vocal.
Backseat, lay me down. I ain't no sleaze that you found. Think you're gonna.
Rolling at 97, just gently getting rid of that. Unwanted, I'll take it off.
Backseat, lay me down. I ain't no sleaze that you found. Think you're gonna.
Back on, audibly made absolutely no difference. But what it may do is just get rid of some super low frequencies that are in the way. I'm not expecting it to make a huge difference on its own, but in a track, the build-up of a lot of low frequency like that in tons of different instruments could cause a lot of problems. Number 4, focus and control your low end. So for instance, the kick drum may be boosted at about 60 Hertz. The bass, typically, maybe a little boost at 80. There's gonna be a crossover area at about 100 and 110, which you'd want to pull out. You also might, at around 60 on the bass, just want to do a gentle slope to remove that. That will clear low end. Having the bass and the kick drum overlap each other will not give you more low end. It will give you a lot of mud and a lot of masking of frequencies. So proper low end control is fantastic. So here you see a kick, which illustrates everything we're talking about. It's actually high passed at 39 because there's a super low kick here. But there's 11 dB cut, a huge cut at 100 Hertz, because that is where the bass is living. So here we see the bass synth plugin. It's gently high passed at 60 Hertz, out of the way of the kick drum. There's still some crossover area here, and the kick drum has 110 pulled out of it. Between those two things, they get out of each other's way. Simple management of the low end will really help your mix. And it's something that professionals do really, really well. Number 5, compression. Use it in stages. Now this is a big one and I get asked about this all the time. For instance, if you go to my vocal bus here, you'll see there's multiple instances of serial compression. That's a compressor followed by another compressor. First of all, we have a Waves Renaissance compressor,
I can see through it now.
which is giving us about 3 to 4 dB of compression. Next, we have a Renaissance Vox, also by Waves, which is giving us, again,
I can see through it now.
probably about another 3 to 4 dB of compression. Now, we use this because each compressor has a different characteristic. Next up, we have another R-comp on the actual vocal compression bus.
I can see through it now.
None of these individual compressors is doing more than 3, possibly 4 dB. In fact, this last one was doing more like 2 dB. What they are each doing is providing gradual amounts of compression, pushing the vocal forward without choking it. A single compressor trying to do 8 or 10 dBs worth of gain reduction will probably choke it, and with only one set of attack and release times set, won't work in every single situation. That's the other thing about using serial compression, is you can use different attack and release times, so compressors come in at different times and release at different times. So in this blend of drums, which is electronic and some real elements, there is a drum sub here. So individual channels are processed with compression, but the drum sub itself, all the drums grouped together, has another set of compression going on it. Then at the very end on the master bus, there's a separate set of compression. So you can use small amounts of compression very often. You can use it in series on your channel, and you can run it into a bus, and then that bus sends to the master bus. Small amounts of compression used often will really get the track to feel like it's got a ton of energy in it. Number 6, use plugins not only for the purpose they were intended, i.e. compression and EQ, but also use them for their sonic characteristics. If you look at the mix, for instance, we've got going on here, you can see I've got an API EQ, a very famous EQ. It has its own sonic characteristic, but also there's many, many others. These EQs and compressors each have their own sonic characteristic. Many of you have watched tutorials with professional mixers, and you've seen them open up plugins and do 1 dB of gain reduction. It causes a lot of consternation and quite often joke videos. The reality is that it may only do 1 dB of gain reduction or 2 dB, or it might only boost a dB or 2 here and there. Also what it's doing is adding another sonic characteristic. It might be adding additional saturation. These are all things that will take your mix to another level. Number 7, don't be afraid to use parallel compression. Parallel compression is your friend. The secret to use parallel compression is to not necessarily have it that loud. If you take your drum mix and then duplicate the sub, you can squash the sub really dramatically and then pull it up very lightly underneath, and it will add so much energy to your drums. People will do this on their 2-bus. You can take your 2-bus mix and duplicate it. So your whole mix is returning on a master fader, and there is a duplicate of that master fader, which has parallel compression on it, really heavy parallel compression, destroying the mix when turned up, but brought down really lightly can add some extra energy, glue, and just excitement to the mix. One of my personal favorite uses of parallel compression is on acoustic guitars when playing arpeggios. Arpeggios, when played lightly, are very uneven. So if you parallel compress the acoustic guitar very heavily and then introduce it underneath, it will add energy to every single individual picked note as it's being played, giving it more articulation. So use parallel compression where you can. Experiment on it everywhere that you want, because in a low-level situation, it can do amazing things. Number 8, pan your instruments to create space and width in your mixes. One of the biggest secrets that professional mixers do is utilize width in the chorus and then narrow the verses. It seems very simplistic to explain, but it's very straightforward. You can just take your verse guitars and go 50%. And then when the chorus comes up, go full 100. and suddenly you're using the full stereo width. Panning is your friend. It's not only there to do things like help those choruses stand out from the verses, but it's also there for other reasons, such as giving a defined center. So if you pan your instruments around your kick, your snare, your vocal, and your bass guitar, all things that traditionally and most of the time work really well in the center, you're creating space in the center for those instruments and that vocal to sit. So get into panning to create space. Having a mix that stays completely stationary in the panning can be good, but there's nothing more exciting than hearing things move wide to create extra dynamics and excitement in your mix. 9, use reverbs and delays to create additional space and depth. You'll find very, very often that many professionals will use tons and tons of reverbs and delays. However, they may have 3 or 4 reverbs and or delays on the vocals at all time, but they're using them in different levels. They'll push up the reverb in a chorus where it gets denser, but in a verse it will come down. The secret to using reverbs and delays is not only just to create a cavernous effect, which is very obvious to make something sound dated, 30s, 40s, 50s style recording. It is there to create space and depth, spatial depth. Just the right amount of reverbs and delays can really help place your instrument or your vocal in a mix. A lot of the times, those reverbs and delays are barely audible until they're muted. There will be times, as I was explaining earlier, where you want a retro sounding track, and so you'll have a lot of reverbs that sound super like 30s, 40s, or 50s. But other times, the effect is just there to create some separation and help the instrument or the vocal feel like it's inhabiting its own space. Number 10, and possibly the most important thing, professionals use automation. Automation really is the secret key to taking your mix to the next level. Just EQ and compressing your track really, really super flat is great. You can go in there and you can add more instruments to create dynamics. However, pushing your kick and snare up in the choruses when it gets denser is a straightforward thing to do with automation. However, it can be even more than that. As a separate guitar part maybe comes in and out and weaves through your mix, the snare might be covered by that. So you're going to have to get there and automate a snare up here and there. Not everything is solved by using compressors. Making everything as loud as each other using compression and limiting is not going to make your mix sound incredibly professional. It will make it sound like a big blob and a big square wave, but you want to get in there and automate and create interest. That's a big, big deal. Creating interest, making things come and go. So get in there at the end of your mix and spend some time doing some automation. Finding out things that are covered that still need to be audible, pushing them up. Deciding when something needs to be featured, like a guitar part needs to come up, like a riff in the middle of a main guitar part needs to maybe be featured. And then the opposite. Finding when a rhythm guitar shouldn't be featured, should just be supportive maybe of a piano part. That's all things that come with automation. So have a great time recording and mixing. And remember, one of the most important things if you really want to mix professionally is make sure you're mixing the right things. Record everything the way you want to hear it. Record the parts so that when you come to mix, they make sense. Now, obviously, if you're mixing somebody else's work, don't be afraid to mute. Quite often, I'll get something to mix which has 5 different guitar parts on each side, and they're playing conflicting parts. They might be in tune and the parts might fit together, but my ear doesn't know where to go. So sometimes automation can also mean muting. So if it's your own production, think that way. If you're mixing somebody else's stuff and you want to give them the best results, sometimes muting is the key to a great mix. Thank you ever so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Please download the cheat sheet. It's got all of the things we just talked about in great detail. So go and download that. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing, and we'll see you again very soon.